Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, Adi Klevit here, the host of the System Simplified podcast, where I interview top founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And today's episode is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group, where we create, document, and implement processes and procedures so businesses can grow and thrive. And today's guest, I'm so excited to introduce today's guest because we're going to talk all about operations and processes. And I know maybe our listeners are not getting that excited about it, but you are on the System Simplified podcast. So our guest today is Cassie Shea. Hi, Cassie.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today. I appreciate it.
You are very welcome. Very, very welcome. Well, let me introduce you. First of all, I want to give a shout out to Steve Ramona, who introduced us, who is a great connector. And I was just on his podcast, and he's going to be a guest on this podcast. So I'm really excited to have him as a guest. He's definitely a giver, and he likes to connect. So every connection from Steve is amazing. So thank you, Steve. So Cassie, can I introduce you? I'm going to introduce you, and then I'm going to ask you to add to it. Okay. So you're basically a co-pilot to online CEOs. So you serve as a fractional COO, which is a chief operating officer, right? So it's basically, you are all about operations and helping businesses with the operations part, but you help them optimize their time and team outsized results for single founders, right? Who are building their team from anywhere from 6 to 7 figures to 90 million a year. And that's amazing. And so you have a background in business operations and HR, and you bring a unique blend of pragmatic and simple operations with training teams to make profit their North Star. Meaning you basically work with companies, with the CEOs, with the group, with the team members in order for them to actually improve profitability through excellence in operations, right?
Exactly.
Excellent. Well, tell us a little bit more about yourself so the listeners get to know you and how you got to be a fractional COO.
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you for having me. So when I was early on in my career, I discovered operations actually through sales. So I grew up in sales. I was doing outbound sales, inbound sales, customer account management, and built a book of business at one point from 0 to 6 million in 1 year. And what I loved about sales is that it's all about execution. And to be really, really good at sales, it didn't necessarily take the best personality or charisma. What I realized is sales actually, to be the most efficient salesperson possible, required great project management skills and operations. And so I realized that salespeople historically, or at least the ones that I was working with, were very people focused. They love the hunt. They love the transaction of figuring out how to put a deal together. But there was a huge piece missing, and that was deal tracking, pipelining, operations forecasting. And so I managed my book of business as a very early person in my career. I managed it like a project management schedule. So the way I'd reach out to my clients was very much using project management best practices. And that's how I grew my book of sales business. So when I left that role, I was looking for an intersection of sales and operations. I realized, oh, that's a whole career, apparently. And I went to another company. I was hired as an entry-level salesperson again at the time. And within 4 months, I became the director of operations, running a $14 million profit and loss statement, and had 14 employees that I was working with directly. And that was a huge leap from entry-level salesperson. So it really challenged my thinking, my leadership capabilities, and my skills. And the reason why I got to that position is because most of what I did in operations was diagnostics. So I went in and I could very rapidly assess the gap between what we were selling, what we were promising to clients, and what the client was actually receiving in terms of the client experience, how they were actually being served. It was a digital marketing agency focused on e-commerce. And that was where I really discovered operations has tremendous power, not just when it comes to powering revenue and making sure that you're contributing to the revenue pipeline through delivery and fulfillment of the product or service. But operations actually has a huge effect on sales and actually designing a client experience on the front end so that you're vetting clients, the clients are the right fit, and that the expectations are set in a way where the client can be successful with your product or service and that the delivery and fulfillment teams are matching up. So that's where I really started to fall in love with operations.
Absolutely. I mean, I agree with you because operations, you have to have excellence in operations also to create a confidence in sales so they continue selling so operations can deliver. Absolutely. So that they definitely go hand in hand. And I love how you said that you basically treated sales as a project management. And I agree because that's what we have CRMs. That's what we have systems, right? Because you have a follow-up system. If you're methodical enough, you're going to be able to sell. I mean, obviously you have to have good communication. You have to have people skills. I mean, you can't be like completely not have that because you can't, nobody's going to listen to you, but you have to systematize it so you can actually make the best out of it. The follow-up, the going back to your gold mine, which is your existing customers and asking for referrals, right? Or circle back and, see if they need more. So all of that definitely contribute to sales. So I agree with you 100%. Well, in this show, in the System Simplified podcast, what I like to do is always create a system for our listeners to take it and use it right away. And you have a fantastic system that triangle that you use with your clients in order to make sure that they are successful. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about that system. So first of all, how do you call that system?
Yeah, so the system I work with that I've designed and developed and deploy to my CEOs and coaching clients is called the resource triangle. So as entrepreneurs and business owners, I believe there's 3 key resources that we are managing at any given time in our business and our lives. And they are time, money, and energy. Now, a lot of us as entrepreneurs, we're very focused on the profit and loss statement. We understand how the cash flow is running in our business, but we don't always think of time as a currency. So that's something that I bring awareness to in terms of operations is where you're spending your time is actually a currency. You can spend time that hopefully multiplies results, or you could be spending time in a way that's actually diminishing and decreasing results, distracting from revenue, and ultimately not helping you get the results in your business that you're really looking for. And then the final piece to the puzzle, in addition to connecting what we're doing with our time to making sure that that's revenue generating, is also looking at energy management, which is state and well-being, is how are you contributing well to your best energy, showing up for your business with the best energy, and also taking enough rest time. We've seen that a lot with professional sports players. I think LeBron James is a great example. He spends over $1 million every year on recovery and rest. So to be peak performers, we also need to plan that time to step away from our business, to refresh and reset ourselves. So most of my clients, I challenge them to actually not work on Fridays. Friday is not an execution day, but we work backwards using this triangle, which I'm happy to talk more about. We work backwards and we actually plan a 4-day work week.
Yeah, that's right. Because that's what we wanted to talk about, the system on how to create the 4-day work week. I think that would be a great, that is basically the title of this podcast, because that's a system of how you can actually do that. So, I'm with you. I'm basically, my Fridays are usually an empty. I mean, I sometimes, will schedule clients if there is overflow and, or a client cannot talk during the week. It's fine, but it is my day of working on the business, right? I don't, it's just like I have the morning where I can actually execute write more strategy or execute it or do other things for myself. But I agree. I mean, I love that. I already implemented that. So let's talk about it. How do you reverse engineer it, or how you work backwards so you can actually have your 4-day week?
Absolutely. So I love that you're already implementing that. And the CEOs that I work with, I actually challenge them to take that one step further and use only the morning if needed for strategy or execution, and then actually take the rest of the day for recreation. So I challenge my CEOs to actually get out in nature, catch up with family time, take that 3-day weekend to really rest and recover and reset, and to schedule that recreation time. I love the idea that recreation precedes creation. So when you are in recreation, that's where some of the best ideas are coming from. So number one place to start in terms of engineering your 4-day work week is actually to, one, block off Fridays on your calendar so that you're not doing execution or client focused work that day, or interfacing with your team if you have one, that it's absolutely a no meeting day. And then the second piece is actually to block off, I would say from noon on, that's not even work time. So you're not even giving yourself that out, because otherwise people will use Fridays as a catch-up day, which kind of eliminates the point and the efficacy of it. So the way I work with my clients, we start either on Monday or even on Thursday the week before, and we plan the week ahead. And we look at 4 levers first on their time that are going to create an outsized result in their business. So normally, a lot of entrepreneurs are used to thinking about, okay, I have, these clients that I need to service. I have this revenue that I need to generate, or I need to create some results with my team. And we think in terms of revenue and results. But the pattern interrupt that I'm introducing is actually to think about with your time, what are you doing this week to create an outsized result? And I use the theory of constraints so that you're only choosing 4 things. And that can map to 1 a day. A lot of times what I do with my clients is we make 1 day a theme. So maybe 1 day is sales, 1 day might be marketing, 1 day might be client delivery, for example. 1 day might be team and internal process and management, just as an example. But we actually select 4 things to do with your time that are going to create an outsized result. What I mean by that is these are not to-do list items. It's not like a project management tool. It's actually looking at if you only had the opportunity to do 4 things this week. That might take you an hour, it might take you a day. But if you only had the opportunity to take 4 actions that would drastically increase your results in business and change the game, what would those actions be with your time? Then we actually map that to money. So we look at how are you spending your time in relationship to revenue generation. So a lot of times they map 1-to-1. So what you're doing to spend your time on, you're actually going to generate a revenue result from. That's not always the case. So then we need to look at making sure that there's 4 action items that the CEO can take that week that are going to contribute, again, to outsized results in their revenue. And then the final piece is energy. So I like to embrace, it's not necessarily about work-life balance, but really maintaining energy and alignment so that you can live and work in your zone of genius. You can produce those outsized results and have peak performance, but you also have the rituals and the routines, the rest and the recovery that are going to support that. So for some clients, that's looked like having a real honest conversation about not skipping meals. So whether that's getting a meal delivery service in place or making sure that they actually have a nutrition plan or even referring them to a nutritionist, but making sure that nutrition's on point, that activity's on point. A lot of times we run ourselves ragged, like improving our business, but we're not necessarily improving our physical health and well-being. So I'll have a client tell me, oh, I'm going to work out 7 days a week. And I'm like, no, we're not writing that down. Let's be really realistic. If you're not working out at all right now, we're not going to say 7 days a week. That's insane. So we break it down into a reasonable goal. Maybe that's 4 times a week for 30 minutes. They're going to walk outside in the sunshine. So it needs to be tangible and time specific. And then finally, we just talk through any kind of routines that they can optimize, whether that's PM or AM routines, or making sure that they're spending enough time with their family, friends, and loved ones outside of work. So the energy component, we also choose 4 focus areas for that week to nurture emotional, intellectual, psychological, relational, and physical well-being, so that all those quadrants of their lives are supported so they can show up with the right energy to the business. So that's kind of a quick recap of how we reverse engineer using constraint theory, how we reverse engineer and choose only the most essential and important items that are high impact to create those outsized results.
I love it. So, Cassie, what are some of the obstacles that CEOs encounter where they don't really implement that? Like, why wouldn't anybody implement it? I mean, it sounds very simple. It sounds great. What do you see? What are the biggest obstacles?
Yeah, sometimes simple can be underrated, right? That's why I love your focus on simplicity with your systems in this podcast. So a couple of things that I notice in terms of patterns is a lack of accountability can lead to distraction. So sometimes it's really easy to just make the best plan starting out at the week and then distractions happen. So the number one thing that I use to mitigate that is I actually have my clients, when we're designing their week, I have them actually schedule these activities onto their calendar. And then they keep those as appointments to themselves. So for example, If a client is working on, let's just give an example, rebranding their website, then I have them block out in either 60 or 90-minute chunks, a deep work session where they're actually going to review that copy. They're going to go in, they're going to make the tweaks that they need to make, and they're going to know that by the end of that power hour or power 90 minutes, that item is crossed off their to-do list. So be intentional with how you're spending your time and actually connecting the dots between what you say you're going to do and preventing yourself from having distraction is really, really key. The other way that I see CEOs derail their progress or have less than optimal results is they're still thinking too tactical. So sometimes a CEO would tell me, oh, I need to create some Instagram reels, or I need to create some social media content. And I know they already have a social media person on their team. So we tease out, if that's something that they're saying they're going to spend their time on, we really tease out, is there something more impactful and important you need to be doing as the CEO that's actually going to leverage your zone of genius in connection with revenue generation that's going to get you the outsized result? And what are you doing to actually empower your team to go out and do their best work? So if it becomes too tactical, that's usually a red flag for me that the CEO is not deeply connected to their strategy, and they're not necessarily feeling their personal power in terms of what they need to be spending their time on to create the results in the company. So if we think about the Pareto principle, like 20% of our efforts usually lead to about 80% of our results. So where I'm there to help coach and support and guide is making sure that the 20% is what goes on this list, not the 80% that creates noise and distraction and less traction and less effort. So I'm really there to kind of curate and edit down. And that's why I like the constraint of only picking 4 things. So in theory, you only picked 4. What are the most important things that you're going to be able to get done? I've been working with one of my clients on this exact system. Gosh, we started back in February. So we worked for the better part of this year. And every week we do the same thing. And it's simple, but it's effective. And he's on track to more than double his business this year, which is very exciting. But it's taken that simplicity and also that focus to not try to tackle too many things at once. It's actually chunking it down. Once we know the overall strategy, chunking it down week by week to maintain rigorous focus.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, you just nailed it in terms of like, you make it simple, you provide accountability of focusing on what's important, because otherwise you get distracted by so many things and you just like lose your intention and you lose your focus as opposed to really concentrating on what you want. So obviously it gets results, right? Are there any tools that you would recommend to our listeners to use that you like to use in order to project manage or in order to manage their time? What anything that you would like to recommend?
Yeah, the number one thing that I recommend, and this is a little bit extreme, is deleting social media apps off of your phone.
Cassie, the number one thing. I did it 3 years ago and it changed my life. Yeah, because people send me these videos and I was like, oh, well, I don't have Facebook on my phone and we're not going to add it either. I have a social media director. I'm definitely on social media. I use LinkedIn a lot for my business, but not on my personal life, because I feel like it was just sucking the time. It was, instead of me working out for half an hour, I would find myself, staring at the phone, right? Which doesn't work. So I became much more productive and much happier. It's actually happened during the pandemic because I was just like, I got like enough. I don't want to hear about it anymore what people think.
Totally.
Like, okay, great. And it was very liberating. I actually very much recommend it. So yes.
I also have one more thing, and it's kind of the direct opposite, but it goes together. And that is taking 20 to 30 minutes to do a nature walk every single day. And I'm very fortunate where I live in Santa Barbara, California. It is paradise. I admit that. But I do have clients even in New Jersey. And one of my clients, she said she would walk as long as it was not below -20. She's like, I'll go out for my nature walk as long as it's not below -20. And I'm like, I've never even seen -20. So you do you. But I really strongly believe in the power of disconnecting from technology. And a lot of my work, especially with this resource triangle, is actually how to maintain peak focus and have the energy so that when you are in that state of deep work and you do need to come and really bring those results, you have that energy. So for me personally, how I fill my tank and stay on track as a peak performer is I really do make sure to take 20 to 30 minutes every day to get outside, to be in nature, whatever that looks like, and be disconnected from my technology during that time. I think that's really key.
Absolutely. And I love doing it too. I mean, as you said, you're in Santa Barbara, in Portland, Oregon, I do it so long as it is not raining. And so long as it's above 50 degrees, I'm not going to the minus 20. I just don't enjoy walking in the rain or the cold. So, but then I do other things, and then I work out at home, but I don't, it's just like, it's that time where you are definitely disconnected from technology and you're moving and but there is no comparison on going in nature. I mean, I love doing that. As a matter of fact, today, for instance, it is a sunny day here. I'm definitely going to go out and do that because it is the best. And I agree with you.
Beautiful. Yeah, there's nothing like it. So as much as our world exists and connects online, and thank goodness for that, so we can have this conversation and reach other people who are listening, I think there's a tremendous power in the disconnection process. And I find I get a lot of my best ideas. When I go on a nature walk, I do one of two things for my business. I either decide I'm going to think about absolutely nothing having to do with business at all, or two, I will take a problem with me on my walk. I'll think about like the most challenging business obstacle, and I'll just turn it over in my brain until I'm done walking. And it's really fun to see what happens in both directions. If I'm intentionally not trying to think about business, sometimes I get my most creative ideas. And when I'm very intentionally thinking about a problem, solving it from the perspective of being in nature, being in a flow state, deep breathing, and just taking a very different approach, interrupting my own pattern essentially, is really, really key to my productivity and my creativity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Cassie, you're a wealth of information and definitely help. So if people would like to get a hold of you, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned LinkedIn. That's where I hang out. LinkedIn would be great. And I'm also going to share with you and your audience the Resource Triangle tool, so they can actually download that and workshop that as well for their lives. I do recommend doing it on a Monday, so you can plan the week ahead and have a successful 4-day work week.
Amazing. Cassie, it's been so wonderful to have you on this podcast. Great information. And thank you for sharing with our listeners, myself. So thank you very much.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.